Hello my friends, welcome to my corner. As you know, the Hungarian author László Krasznahorkai was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature this year. I'm going to read you the citation. For his compelling and visionary oeuvre that in the midst of apocalyptic terror reaffirms the power of art. Now, as you may know, I have read at least one book by every winner of the Nobel Prize in Literature. That is kind of my thing. And this year I was really happy to realize that I had already read the latest or the newest laureate. Just one book though, that was Sátántangó, which I read 5 years ago, so it was during the pandemic actually. I'm going to tell you, it went completely over my head. I was not prepared for the style, for the subject matter, or for anything, really. So this year, this time, for my Nobel Prize podcast, I decided to go with a different book. And this is the one that we are going to focus on, ellenállás melankóliája, which is the Melancholy of Resistance. Why did I choose this one in particular? One of my reasons was that it is a relatively brief text. We are talking about 314 pages to be exact, so I really liked that, especially when compared to the brick that is, for example, Baron Wenckheim's Homecoming. So I was like, let's start with something a little bit shorter. But there's another reason also that to me is even more important, and that is that I had already seen the film adaptation, Werckmeister Harmonies. I'm going to share with you a couple of thoughts on that as we explore this novel. So with those two reasons in mind, I thought this would be a good choice, and I think I was not mistaken because I really enjoyed the reading experience, and that's one of the reasons why I want to share these thoughts with you. So The Melancholy of Resistance was Krasznahorkai's second novel after Sátántangó, and it was published in 1989. Like other novels by Krasznahorkai, you're going to notice that this one explores life in small-town Hungary. So it's familiar territory if you are familiar with the works of this author. And as a matter of fact, the author said that this novel, and actually the first four novels that he wrote, are in a sense one book that is complete with the publication of Baron Wenckheim's Homecoming. So we can look at this whole thing as one piece of work, the first four novels. Do you remember the saying that I shared with you a couple of times before, Pueblo chico, infierno grande, small town, big hell? Well, here you have another very good example of that. Let me tell you about the structure. As I said, this book is 314 pages in length. It is divided into three parts. We're going to explore the titles in a second when we look at the actual contents of the book. And then it is divided into chapters. So the first part is divided into 2 chapters, the second part 6 chapters, and then the last part is a chapter in itself. So that is, my math is not very good here, but say 7, 8, 9, 9 chapters in total. And yes, for some weird reason, I do count in Spanish. Okay, it's just the way that I can do it. Otherwise, it doesn't even work. So let's look at the contents then. As I told you, 3 parts. The first one is titled An Emergency, and before that, below the title, it says Introduction. So in a sense, what we have here is a seemingly traditional structure with an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. That could be ironic, maybe, but that's the way we are going to explore this book. We first meet, the first character that we encounter is a certain Mrs. Plauf. She is a very proper lady, and she's returning home by train and then by bus. And during this journey back home, she has an uncomfortable encounter with an unshaven, that's the way he is described, man who she thinks he wants to take advantage of her. Right? So that is the first situation that we encounter. And here's something interesting from the very first page. What we have here is a mood of uncertainty, a mood of chaos, a mood of precariousness. And there are omens of some kind of a coming catastrophe. And Krasznahorkai is very good at establishing this from page 1, as I said before. We learn that Mrs. Plauf has a son. His name is János Paluska, and she considers him to be a bit of a mess, a bit of a disgrace. So there's already some kind of family conflict going on right here. And when eventually Mrs. Plauf gets home, she receives the visit of Mrs. Esther. Now, Mrs. Plauf does not like Mrs. Esther because she sees Mrs. Esther as a kind of opposite to her. She, Mrs. Esther, is the president of the Women's Committee, and she is on a mission. She wants to bring about change, in her mind positive, in this town that is, according to her, a complete mess. So that is how the novel begins. This is the introduction to the novel. And then we go to part 2, which is titled Werckmeister Harmonies, just like the movie. And below that title, we get the subtitle, Negotiations. So very interesting right there, what these negotiations are going to be. The second part, just so you know, begins on page 63, just to give you an idea of the amount of pages that we have here. This is the body of the novel. And what happens here is that we switch the focus from Mrs. Plauf now to her son, Valushka, okay? He is a sort of disciple slash caretaker of Mr. Esther, so obviously Mrs. Esther's husband. And Valushka is a newspaper delivery guy. He is perceived by everybody else, and I would say the way he's presented by the narrator is even consistent with this, as the town's fool. But at the same time, he's a really good person. He is an embodiment of the concept of spirit, maybe, for many reasons that you will encounter in the novel when he is described by the other characters, in particular by Mr. Esther. So we have a really, really good character at the center, even though he is perceived as a fool. He has a cyclical view of human existence. You know, while I was reading his perception of things, I thought of Camus' interpretation of Sisyphus, this cyclical concept, right? You do something only to have it crumble, and then you have to start again. That whole thing is part of his perception. And it is primarily through the eyes of Valushka that we see the central event in this novel. And that is the arrival of a circus, which includes an exhibition of the carcass of the world's largest whale. So incredible symbol, incredible image that we have at the center of this novel, and we may ask ourselves, you know, what is this whale, right? And of course we could think of Leviathan, we could think of the story of Jonah, but I was thinking, because of things that are said in the novel, in particular of that good old story of the 3 blind men and the elephant. You know, they touch the elephant in different places and they have a different perception of the elephant, until they put together all of those perceptions and they can have an idea of what the elephant is really like. But in this case, what we have here is an animal, a monster, if you will, so large that it cannot be seen all at once. That's what happens to Valushka when he actually gets the chance to see the whale. This is the ungraspable. You know, that's what we're talking about with this image that is at the center of the novel, this huge carcass of a whale. So we talked about Valushka, right? What is Mr. Esther like, on the other hand? I would say that he is cynical, he is insecure, he is reclusive also, and he seems to be bored with life. You know, he seems to think that chaos is the natural order of things. That is his worldview. And he really likes Valushka. He depends on him also because he sees Valushka as generous and simple, as an embodiment of the good, maybe an embodiment of the spiritual, as we were saying before. And he even says at one point in the novel, or thinks, right, that Valushka proves that angels exist. So we have a very interesting connection, a very interesting dynamic here between the, you know, Mr. Esther and his caretaker slash disciple. Now, Mrs. Esther, she wants her husband, with whom she is not living anymore, by the way, to assume the role of a leader in this movement that she's trying to begin, in order to get the town to function a little bit better, in order to bring about some kind of order in her mind, right, from her perspective, to this chaotic place that is this small town that doesn't have a name at any point in the novel. And a group of people take advantage of this confusion that happens when the circus arrives in order to stage a kind of structureless, I would say, and maybe even aimless uprising, okay? And there's a mysterious figure at the center of that called or known as the Prince, and he may be behind the uprising or not. There are many unanswered questions here, just as in real life sometimes. So that would be my description of the body of the novel. And then of course we come to the final part, which, let me see if I can tell you exactly when it starts. It begins on page 283. This one is titled Sermo super sepulchrum, which means, of course, sermon or speech over the grave, right, over the sepulcher. And it says conclusion right below that as a subtitle. We also change focus in this one because this one focuses on Mrs. Esther. And in this part, because it focuses on her, we can really perceive her cynicism. To her, society, this is what she describes society as, a foul marsh of petty self-interest. That is her perception of human beings. And what she wants to be is the wind that bends the reeds. That's how she puts it also. So you see this will to power, this opportunism that is part of her personality. And this last part focuses on the death of one of the characters. I'm not going to tell you who, because I want you to, explore that and find that out for yourself. And then on Mrs. Esther's sermon or speech or eulogy at the funeral of this character. That is the Sermo of the title. Now, towards the very end of the novel, something really interesting happens, and that is a shift in tone and also in the kind of language that is used, because the language all of a sudden becomes medical, as the narrator is describing in clinical terms the process of decomposition. So we have a very interesting parallel right here, because we have on one hand the social and the political struggle, and then on the other hand we have the struggle against entropy that happens within our bodies, right? So it seems that according to the perspective that is offered by this novel, decay, destruction are just the natural end of things. And that brings us directly to the title, which I think is very interesting, and we should explore it at least briefly. The Melancholy of Resistance. Why is there a melancholy to resistance? Well, I would say because resistance is futile. If decay and destruction and decomposition are the natural end of things. But at the same time, if we say and if we perceive life as a battle against entropy, by that same token, then resistance is inevitable, right? In other words, human beings are wired to resist, but no matter how much we resist, the end result is always going to be the same, and hence that melancholy of the title right there. Those are just my 2 cents on the title and what it meant for me. Let's talk about style. We have to talk about style if we're going to explore the work of Krasznahorkai in particular. He writes in long, not endless, okay, but definitely long sentences that have no paragraph breaks, okay? So I would describe his style as mesmerizing. That's how I experienced it, okay? It really involves you, it just flows, and it makes you a part of the text. And for the most part, what I found was that the style was introspective. So as I read Krasznahorkai, at least in this particular novel, and from what I remember also in Sátántangó, he reminded me of Virginia Woolf, and in particular of the kind of text, introspective description that you may find in To the Lighthouse. So that is the connection that I made right there. And regarding the mode, the atmosphere, and even the subject matter, I would say that the novel made me think, of course, of the work of Franz Kafka. It made me think of Beckett at points also. And because of those connections, obviously, since this is a text also that is kind of fresh in my memory, it made me think of the Kazuo Ishiuro of The Unconsoled. Okay, so if you're interested in more on that, you can also, of course, check out my video. But that is the texture of the prose that we find here. It's really quite delightful. I want to touch upon a few themes, okay, very briefly, just sort of share with you some quick ideas on these. And the first one that I want to explore is what is called in the novel the epidemic of fear. I feel that what Krasznahorkai is exploring here is a spiritual problem, this epidemic of fear. No apocalypse, no judgment. It seems that the world is going to fall apart by itself. So as I read that and I explored these ideas, and connected them to things that I had read before, the author that came to mind first, and this has to do a lot with my upbringing, was Ernesto Sábato, okay, the Argentine author. He was described, at least in Argentina at one point, as a witness of hell. Okay, so it's very appropriate stuff that is going on here if we compare the two authors. And Sábato, in a nutshell, right, to be very simplistic about this, what he describes and what he portrays is the state of the world after the collapse of values and after the loss of hope. So you can see why there would be similar, ideas and a similar atmosphere if you compare the work of Sábato to the work of Krasznahorkai. And as we read Krasznahorkai, we get the feeling, or this is a feeling that I got, right, that the end of time is taking place right now. We are living it, or even that the end of time already took place and it seems that nobody realized it. That's what I was thinking about when I was reading this novel in particular. So that is something to consider. That is the first theme that I want to explore. The second one is conflict. I think that Krasznahorkai is just really good. He does a great job at portraying this socio-political conflict, but with a twist. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is that, of course, as I told you, at the center of the novel we have an uprising, but it is never clear why it took place or who started it. We have a lot of questions here, a lot of unanswered questions, just as in life sometimes. So it seems to be, this uprising seems to be like an instinctive response to chaos. It's the way that human beings respond to this state of uncertainty, of precariousness that is established from the very first page of the novel. Maybe it's a symptom of it also, but we go back to that idea that resistance may be futile, but it is also inevitable, and that's one thing that I also see in this idea of conflict. And at one point what happens is very interesting, because in the novel there are different types of discourse, and we get the glimpse into a journal that portrays the mentality of the crowd, the mentality of the mob that is causing these riots. And I wanted to read you a passage from here, just so that we can get also a sense of the style. So if you go to page number 234, so 234, what we find here is this. The bitter, evil pleasure of seeing these three lonely shadows helplessly swaying ahead of us, not even knowing for certain what was in store for them, exceeded even the power of the spell cast by the sight of the smashed-up town, meant more than the satisfaction occasioned by all the pieces of useless stuff we had trampled underfoot, for in that perpetual holding back, in the sheer joy of deferral, in that infernal putting off, we savoured something wry, mysterious and ancient, that lent our least movement a fearsome dignity, the kind of unimpeachable pride possessed by all barbaric hordes, even when they know they might be scattered far and wide the day after, mobs whose momentum is unstoppable since they have appropriated even the thought of their own death, should they decide to make an end, their mission done, having had their fill forever of both earth and heaven, with misfortune and sadness, with pride and fear, as well as with that base, tempting burden which will not allow one to give up the habit of pining for liberty. That is one sentence, of course, and it gives you an idea of the mentality of the crowd, as I was saying before. And the other theme that I wanted to explore with you is the different responses that people may have to chaos. Okay, we get several different responses to that, and this chaos is in a way a result or an answer, a response to the presence of the circus. We can see the circus there as a type of catalyst that produces all this upheaval in this small town. One response would be, of course, violence. You have the riots, right? A second response, and we see this in Mrs. Esther, is opportunism. Those people who are always there at the site of chaos, ready to take advantage of it like vultures, right, in order to obtain more power, or to grow in their influence or something like that. And that would be the example of Mrs. Esther. But then we have a really interesting third possibility, at least a third one, and I really like this one, and we see this one in Mr. Esther, and that is a holding on to objects or to possessions as a kind of source of stability. When everything seems to be collapsing, when everything seems to be just in a state of chaos, objects would give you that idea of something that at least is stable. And there's another passage here that I would like to share with you. This one is on page 192 that has to do with this idea that I just shared with you. He suddenly realized that he had been escaping all his life, that life had been a constant escape from meaninglessness into music, from music to guilt, from guilt and self-punishment into pure ratiocination, and finally escape from that too, that it was retreat after retreat, as if his guardian angel had, in his own peculiar fashion, been steering him to the antithesis of retreat, to an almost simple-minded acceptance of things as they were, at which point he understood that there was nothing to be understood, that if there was reason in the world, it far transcended his own, and that therefore it was enough to notice and observe that which he actually possessed. And he really had retreated into an almost simple-minded acceptance of things as they were, because now, as he closed his eyes for a few minutes, he was aware of nothing but the velvety parameters of his home, the protective embrace of the roof over his head, the security of the rooms between which he could freely pass, the permanent half-light of his book-lined wall, which faithfully followed the right-angled plan of the building and seemed to convey the calm of the garden, which looked neglected right now, but would be flowering by the time spring came round. And it continues to list and to mention things that Mr. Esther is beholding in this idea, that maybe through these objects he may get some sense of stability in the midst of chaos. So that is another interesting response to that chaos. About the movie, okay, so I checked out for the second time. I had seen it before, Werckmeister Harmonies. I checked it out from my library. This was directed by Béla Tarr and also by Ágnes Hranitzky, and it was released in the year 2000. So we are talking about a film that is already 25 years old. And I'm going to tell you, this is one of the best adaptations that I have ever seen, because it is a loose adaptation. So it adds, it omits deliberately, and you can tell that the filmmakers had really a lot of freedom when it comes to that. And probably, with the author's blessing, of course, because his name is also mentioned when it says a film by, and it mentions not only the director and the co-director, but also the author of the text, which is, I think, something that should always be done. I think that is amazing. So you get Krasznahorkai's atmosphere and his characters, but you also get, of course, the transcendent, the inimitable style of Béla Tarr, and that is just a wonderful combination. He is the perfect director to adapt works by his compatriot in this case. There is a wonderful, I would say, let me call it a reciprocity between the film and the novel, and let me tell you what I mean by that. I am not going to analyze the film or give you a lot of details, but I do want to say this. Having watched the film before I read the novel, which is something that I rarely do, by the way, really enriched my experience of the novel. And then after that, just having read the novel, I really had a much better appreciation of the film upon rewatching it, because this was the second time that I watched this film. And I thought that was just amazing. That had never happened to me before, to see how the two works complemented each other in that way. So that was a really, really powerful experience for me, and the film is just simply a beautiful work of art. Let me tell you why it is that I had seen it, why I watched it in the first place. I am a list person. When there's a list, I try to go with it and complete it, and it just so happens that Werckmeister Harmonies is in Roger Ebert's list of great movies. So I was watching all of those. I'm still missing like probably 6 of them or 4 of them, I think. And this was one of those films. So I was like, let's watch it, back in the day when I saw it for the first time. And that was the reason why I had seen it before. So I'm going to say, don't miss it. Okay, watch this film. I would say preferably read the book first, but I can tell you from my own experience that even if you decide to watch the movie first and then read the novel, go back to the movie afterwards, because you'll have probably a similar experience to the one that I did. Bottom line. The Melancholy of Resistance has left an indelible mark on me. This reached me a lot more than Sátántangó, and I think it's probably mainly because I was better prepared for it, having read the author before with that other novel. I really loved the themes and the exploration of power, of crowds, of the chaos in a world without a head. There are many connections here with Elias Canetti, as you can see. And above all, I enjoyed entering the minds and even the souls, I would say, of these characters, in such a profound way, which is what Krasznahorkai manages to do, to get you inside the mind of these characters through that beautiful introspective style that to me had a connection to The Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. But there are many other connections that you can make, but even that I think is a wonderful thing. You have the material that you may find in Sábato with the style of Virginia Woolf, and I think that is just amazing. So one thing that I want to say though is if you're going to explore Krasznahorkai for the first time, this is not one of the novels that get most of the attention. Many people talk about Sátántangó, about Baron Wenckheim's Homecoming, and maybe War and War, some of the others. But I think this one really deserves a lot of attention, and I think it's just a wonderful way to enter the narrative world of this author. So definitely check it out, and check out the movie too. Do you have any questions, comments, recommendations, recipes? I'm always here and I'm always listening. Those were my 2 cents on The Melancholy of Resistance by László Krasznahorkai. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for stopping by and have a wonderful day.